Hello and welcome to this APM webinar on Stakeholder Engagement Resources for Project Managers. Before we begin, I have a few housekeeping points that I need to run through. The webinar is going to be recorded. The recording will be posted afterwards on the APM website on the People SIG community page, and it'll be there together with the slides that we'll be using today. It will also be posted on SlideShare and YouTube afterwards as well. All attendees are currently on mute. If you would like to ask a question, please do so. Just use the question box on the control panel on your screen. Just type in your question and we'll answer as many as we can at the end of the presentation. The webinar is scheduled for an hour. If we run out of time before we've had a chance to address everyone's questions, then we'll post the answers on the People SIG community page. After the webinar, there'll be a survey for participants. Please do respond, give us your feedback so that we know how we can improve next time. And finally, for your CPD, you'll need to self-certify attendance, and this webinar counts as 1 hour. So without further ado, let's get started. Let me start with some introductions. My name is Fran Bodley-Scott and I'm here with my colleague Ian Cribbs. Both of us are members of the Stakeholder Engagement Focus Group, which is part of the APM People SIG. A little bit about me. My background's in engineering and in marketing and communications. And while I'm not a practicing project manager, I have been involved in projects and programs for over 20 years in various roles: product development, business development, organisation change, and various stakeholder communication roles. Ian, do you want to say a little bit about your background?
Yes, good afternoon everybody. My name is Ian Cribbs. I've been involved in projects and programs for some 20 plus years now, much of it dealing with programs with BA systems. I worked and lived in the Middle East, did a lot of work there. I've now come back to the sunny UK as it is today and set up my own business and consultancy on change management, program management, project management. Like Fran, I'm also engaged with the Stakeholder Engagement Focus Group and working closely with Russell on the People SIG for this program. Thank you.
Okay, thanks Ian. So here's our agenda for today's presentation. I'm going to start, I'll talk a little bit about the Stakeholder Engagement Focus Group, why we think there's a need to focus more attention on stakeholder engagement, and what we're doing in relation to resources for project managers. I'll then hand over to Ian, who's going to go into more detail about the sort of people-related challenges and the issues that project managers need to consider, and where you can find tools and guidance to help. And then we'll finish with a call to action to you to not only review how you might improve your approach to stakeholder engagement, but also to help us build up the library of resources that practitioners need. So why do we need to focus on stakeholder engagement? Well, first, who do we mean when we talk about stakeholders? There are several definitions. The APM defines stakeholders as individuals or groups with an interest in the project, program or portfolio because they're involved in the work or affected by the outcomes. This slide provides an alternative definition. Just replace the word organisation with project and you get the gist. The point being that your list of stakeholders will go beyond those people directly involved with delivering your project. Perhaps the real decisions are being made behind the scenes. Perhaps there are people in the community who are unaware of the project at the moment but will be impacted later on by decisions that are being made now by your project team. One of the challenges for the project manager is to identify who they are, because stakeholders have the power to derail or change the direction of a project, and yet stakeholders are frequently not given the level of attention that's warranted by those potential risks. And this is one of the key messages that we want to get across, that stakeholder engagement needs to be a higher priority. There are many reasons why a project may struggle to achieve its goals, but it's now widely acknowledged that one of the main ones is poor stakeholder engagement. We continue to see examples of projects where a lack of effective stakeholder engagement has led to delays, to problems, or project failure. Given this evidence that things need to change, why does stakeholder engagement continue to be an issue? Well, prioritisation is one issue. Traditionally, stakeholders are considered at quite a late stage in the project management process after many of the key decisions have been taken. Effective stakeholder engagement is perhaps most important in the initial phases where the project objectives and the success criteria are being established. A second issue is access to tools and guidance. For the project manager who's looking for guidance and examples of how to approach particular situations, the toolkit is somewhat lacking. There's little guidance or support for this topic in the APM body of knowledge, and while there are plenty of relevant and valuable publications and tools being developed and being published, they're actually very difficult to find. So back in 2013, members of the APM Thames Valley branch formed the Stakeholder Engagement Focus Group, aka the SEFG, to try and address these issues. Now, the mission of the SEFG is not to invent the wheel about how to do stakeholder engagement, but to make the existing knowledge and experience accessible and to encourage practitioners to make stakeholders a higher priority at all stages of the project lifecycle. So in terms of resources, we've started to build a stakeholder engagement website to host useful information, so case studies, tools, publications. It's hosted on the APM website, but it is available to anyone regardless of whether you're a member of the APM or not. Now, just to set expectations, the aim of today's webinar is not to dive into how to do stakeholder engagement, but rather to point you towards resources and guidance that may help you deliver your project successfully. Now, another bit of terminology that I think is worth discussing is stakeholder engagement versus stakeholder management. They're often used interchangeably, but they're not the same. Now, this slide illustrates the sort of stakeholders you may have to deal with. It could be industry regulators, contract lawyers, politicians, maybe negative stakeholders, like maybe competitors to your organization or members of the public. In this stakeholder environment, you don't have the formal authority or that hierarchical structure to apply management practices to your stakeholders. The best we can hope for is to influence and to drive consensus by listening, by questioning, and by involving them. Stakeholder management is about managing the stakeholder engagement process. Projects happen within an environment of people. Projects you impact your environment by drawing on resources, by delivering benefits or indeed disbenefits for stakeholders. Equally, people in that environment affect the way a project can be managed. For instance, the culture, the geography of your implementation team, the presence of regulators or not, media interest. All of these issues can affect the complexity of a project and the tools you need to work with your stakeholders. And the better we understand who those stakeholders are and their objectives, the better our ability to involve them and to influence them. And as this slide illustrates, despite the best laid project plans, the reality is that the route is never going to be straightforward. So the earlier you start understanding and engaging with your stakeholders, the better prepared you'll be for navigating the road ahead. At this point, I'm going to hand over to Ian to tell you a little bit more about what the SEFG has been doing to help you with your stakeholder engagement. So Ian, to you.
Thanks, Fran. When we started looking at this as part of the Stakeholder Engagement Focus Group, we decided that we would build a sort of a website that could be hosted by the APM, as all members of the APM. However, very early in that stage, we made the decision that the website would be available to all and sundry throughout the world, even if they don't belong to the APM. And Fran's already mentioned that. A key aspect was not to reinvent the wheel. There is a lot out there and we didn't want to reinvent the wheel. So we went down the route of seeking and gaining approval from the RICS, the Royal Institute of Chartered Surveyors, to utilize some of their work to provide a basis for our studies. And that's the colored diagram on the left-hand side of the slide that you've got in front of you now. And utilizing those, we started to build a series of case studies, etc., and more on these later. we use the diagram to illustrate the nature of our studies emanating from these 10 key studies or key principles. We looked at case studies, behavioral patterns, different tools and techniques that are available. We started to compile a bibliography. We looked at rules of thumb and frequently asked questions. A case studies was an interesting concept for us in that it's essentially a record of an experience from a single project. And what it does, it covers the background of the project, it sets the scene, the issues, what was not working well and why, if we knew, the challenges, what had to be done and or changed to get it right, the solution, what actions were taken by the project team in that particular project, and the benefits realized through raising the issue. Now these basically were two, measurable and intangibles. The measurable could be financial, could be timescale, it could be throughput. The intangibles was reputational, and that was a real focus for us, was looking at reputational. Then we went on to the learning points. The experience and learning are both an individual and a corporate thing and may influence stakeholder interaction in future projects. Currently we have some 20 case studies on the website, and they cover a wide range of unique projects, both UK and internationally based. Now, to protect the innocent and perhaps the guilty, they've been sanitized. We did that, but without the loss of the message and the impact. So if you have a case study that you would like us to add to our website so that people can look at, please be assured it will be sanitized so that people can't be identified and organizations can't be identified. And we would like more, and we can send you a template if you have any that you would like to add to us for that. As I said, they analyze and draw conclusions about the behavior, about the stakeholder behaviors in a single project-related experience. They present context-specific experiences, and they draw based on the behavior of the stakeholder. So they're looking beyond the project team onto the stakeholders. One that I have been reading today, just again, is on organizational change and stakeholder engagement. That is a particular interest to me because it comes from a colleague in the Middle East who put that one together for us. You better find it from the Middle East, but you won't be able to find out who he is. The other thing we looked at was patterns. Patterns are a series of observations drawn from a range of projects. They're not one specific project. If you like, it's a horizontal slice across or a number of projects. At the time, the Stakeholder Engagement Focus Group was meeting in one of the rooms in the SAID Business School in Oxford. They have been doing a lot of studies on patterns and very graciously gave us a presentation on patterns and how they can benefit various organizations. They look at repeated behaviors and that in our case can impede stakeholder engagement. We currently only have 5 patterns on the website, and we really would like more. And it's about behavior of stakeholders across a range of projects. You can have things like the distant sponsor. Now I know there's a lot of talk going on at the moment. If you want to look up about distant sponsors, look at Ron Rosenhead. He does a lot of blogs on sponsors and how they affect projects and stakeholders. or just how important is this project was another one that we had put on there. So please feel free to engage with us, look at them on the website, and if you have one, send it. We will quite happily help you sanitize it so that it doesn't embarrass anybody before it's published on the website. And again, these are available to everybody, whether you're part of the APM or not. Stakeholder mapping, we're doing tools and techniques, but it's a work in process. We have not, and we don't intend to, list all the various tools and techniques that are currently out there. That would just take up way too much room and time and energy. But what we do hope to do is to illustrate a selection in order that those seeking guidance will at least have a starting point. Again, please feel free to offer suggestions for others once you've had a look at those that are on the website. But to carry out stakeholder mapping, you actually need to know who your stakeholders are. Now, we are putting something together that will help with that in the future, but that's not available for us today. But the main purpose of the mapping exercise is to be in a position where you know the position, the level and influence and interest of each of the stakeholders. Now, one key area is to identify which of the stakeholders actually holds the power. We often look at, well, you know, there's the senior man in an organization, he must hold the power. There's the project sponsor, they must hold the power. But that's not always the case. They may have advisors in the background that are actually holding the power and the influence and advising these other people. And you need to seek out who those people are in the background so that you can interact with them as well. Color styles, and I'm sure many of you will have come across color styles. It's a very useful tool to identify the key value, the orientation, and the time for each of your stakeholders. What are their key values? How do they like to be related to? Is it institutional? Is it action? Is it thinking? Is it a relationship? What about time? Do they think about the past or the present or the now? Are they flexible? And to be able to communicate with and engage with your stakeholder, you need to have a clear idea of where they fit in these 4 boxes, because each will react differently to how you're doing it. The crucial conversation, talking to your stakeholder, is vital. We carried out a survey in the early days of the Stakeholder Engagement Focus Group, and it was thrown out across UK and internationally through the members of the SEFG and the contacts that they had. And the results that came in, and we analysed the results, and there was only basically 4 questions that went out to them, but the prime point that came back from nearly everybody was the importance of face-to-face meetings with your stakeholders, particularly as early as possible in the project. Fran's already mentioned that stakeholders are dealt with late in projects when things have already been set in stone and you now have an agitated stakeholder on your hands. Get in there, into their face, talk to them, find out what their likes, their dislikes, their aspirations are, what they feel about the project. By talking to your stakeholders that you have identified, you can often uncover other stakeholders that you've not got listed down in your stakeholder plan or stakeholder map. Somebody will say, oh, by the way, have you talked to so-and-so, because they might be interested in this. Or, oh, I know somebody who doesn't want this project to happen. And that's where you can find out. It's without a doubt that stakeholders will have thoughts and concerns and objections to the project. By talking to them and explaining the positives about the project, you can understand that some will focus on the negative and some on the positive. Conversations with the stakeholders is an ongoing task. It's not once in a while, I'll do it every 6 months. If you need their support, then they need to be kept informed. If you want to avoid a stakeholder trying to derail a project, then you need to be aware of this as early as possible. That means regular conversations. There's a gentleman called Graham Robb who has put out a book on crucial conversations, And in that he defines it as conversations around high stakes, emotional or risky topics. By learning how to speak up and be heard and encouraging others to do the same, your organization will begin to surface the best ideas, make the highest quality decisions, and then be able to act on those decisions with a degree of unity and commitment. Crucial conversations take place every day in every project, or at least they ought to be doing. There are discussions between 2 or 3 or 4 or more of you where the stakes are high, there's a difference of opinion, and emotions run strong. Who's ever run a project that doesn't have differences of opinions and emotions running strong? The difference between average and great project performance lies in how people handle these difficult conversations. At the heart of all project challenges are conversations. They're not being handled well, resulting in strained relationships and sometimes diminished results. Often, we consider the potentially negative repercussions of speaking up and getting it wrong, but rarely consider the cost of silence from ourselves and the organization. In dealing with our stakeholders, we need to identify the conversations that are keeping them from their desired results. We need to learn to be able to speak persuasively, not abrasively, no matter what the topic. We need to make it safe for others to share their honest opinions. We need to learn how to deal with people who either clam up or even worse still, blow up. We need to gain control of their own emotional responses and our own. We need to learn to be able to disagree, but without being disagreeable. We need to be able to influence without exerting force. And one I learned very much so in the Middle East was how to say no without using the word no. Every project should have a communication plan. And I'm sure you all do. But there's a few questions that I think you need to consider. Is it being used? Is it updated on a regular basis? Is it comprehensive? Or is it simply gathering dust somewhere? The illustration on the screen now is a communication matrix for stakeholders for a large, complex program which stretched across international boundaries. It went from the Middle East, the UK, Europe, and America. That was the plan that we put together, but it is a point in time of the program. It did change periodically as the program and the associated projects matured and the emphasis changed. It was a 6-year program and key players changed. So the matrix had to change to reflect that and be then resort, going back to our color chart that we saw. How does the new person fit in? How does he want to be fitted in? The roles, the influence and the interest of the stakeholders were actually revisited once a month, more often if necessary, with key personnel, and then reissued. This can be an amusing little cartoon, but it could be extremely embarrassing if failure to communicate in a clear, concise and timely manner. Failure to communicate in an effective manner will often lead to off-the-wall change requests. No communication means I can still change things. The project champions that you've identified start to lose interest or get busy with other work. It takes time to get them back on board, especially when you need their assistance and support, often in a hurry. Project blockers see that as an opportunity to spread the negatives about the project. Quote, the project manager is hiding things that have gone wrong, with the potential of an increased budget. As I mentioned, a lot of the projects I dealt with covered international boundaries, and being aware of cultural boundaries within that program was paramount for success. Failure to understand and adapt to these cultural boundaries is a major concern and can seriously harm the project. In the Middle East, they have a thing called the Majalis principle. That means that when you go into a small personal meeting, the first 65% of it will be social, talking about where you've been, did you go on holiday, how's the family. The business end comes right at the end. Trying to introduce a business topic in that social interaction at the beginning will cause serious discomfort. Often there's a silo mentality. Who's not talking to who? There's a blame culture. It's not my fault, it's his. Hospitality. In the Middle East, you will often be invited to a dinner or a meal at someone's home. Now, whilst you might feel tired and want to go back to bed or not want to go, it's a real slight to your host and potential customer if you don't take it up. In the Middle East, interaction between religion, politics and business, they're all meshed together. You can't distinguish one from the other. If you go further east and go to Japan, the handling of business cards in Japan is a very tricky situation. And there are some case studies on the web that will deal with these. As I mentioned previously, we have a bibliography that is hosted on the website that contains various books and articles that can provide guidance and advice. If you have something you feel could or should be included, then please feel free to let us know. We're always looking for suggestions. I'll now hand back to Fran for a call to action.
Thanks, Ian. Right, finishing on a call to action, there are in fact 4 calls to action. First, take a moment, review your own stakeholder engagement plans and how they might be improved. As well as the issues that Ian's mentioned today, go onto the APM Stakeholder Engagement website, read through those key principles and you may find some useful guidance and ideas there. Secondly, take some time to learn more about stakeholder engagement. I think both Ian and I would readily agree that we've been doing this for some years. We never stop learning. There's always more to learn. There's always more experience that we can gain from other people and other people's ideas and tools that have worked that we can steal with pride. Again, go to the APM's Stakeholder Engagement Resources pages where you'll find the case studies, the key principles that we've mentioned. You'll also find a new thing that we've started putting out this year, the Useful Links monthly update where we just list each month half a dozen upcoming events or publications or new tools that we've come across that you might find useful, and you'll find those on that website. On the subject of events, there are 2 APM events happening this week where members of the SEFG are talking about stakeholder engagement. The first one, Introduction to Stakeholder Management with the SWWE branch. I believe that's in Bristol tomorrow night, and in Southampton I think it is on the 23rd in the evening. You never make it alone. Do go if you're able. You'll find details on the APM events website if you want to register. And also in July, Ian and I will be at APM Presents, and we're going to be talking about the stakeholder engagement key principles, and we'd love to meet you there. I think a note went out today actually about the APM Presents event, so again, take a look on the APM events website and you'll find information there and you can register. Third call to action. Please help us. Help us by contributing your experience, as it may help other practitioners address particular situations or deal with particularly challenging stakeholders. Ian's already asked, if you've got case studies of how stakeholder engagement works in your organisation, or maybe particular issues that need to be considered in your industry or in a particular part of the world, or how you've dealt with typical problems like the absent sponsor or perhaps community engagement, then please let us know. Your experience may be useful to others. You may feel that, oh, you've got nothing to share, but actually if you've been through a particular scenario, you've dealt with a particular issue, then other people can learn from that. So please do get in touch with us and we can help you put together those. We've got the templates, we can help you put together those case studies. And as Ian said, we'll make sure that they're sanitized, that they're anonymous, so that organizations or individuals aren't named or aren't identifiable. For our useful links updates, if you know of any upcoming events, maybe your branch or your SIG is doing some work around this or putting an event on, or it's going to be a topic that's going to be covered perhaps at a SIG conference coming up, or maybe you know of particular tools that you've used or that are being worked on by a particular organization, let us know. We can put a link to them into our monthly useful links update. And finally, tell us what resources would be helpful to you on the Stakeholder Engagement website. We're getting a lot of traffic to the site. What you see on the screen here, this is the analytics for the two main web pages for January. The figures are pretty similar for February, and as you can see, we're getting over 4,500 unique visitors a month. So we know that people are looking for information. We also know that it's not perfect. Please do get in touch, tell us what your priorities are so that we can develop the site content in a useful direction. So with that, I think it's time to a pause and just see if there are any questions that we've got coming in. Ian, I know you're keeping an eye on the questions page.
Yeah, I've got a couple of questions that have come in. One is, can you specify a process specifically for construction industry to manage stakeholders? One of the projects I'm involved in at the moment is the restoration of a Grade 1 listed church that's approximately 1,000 years old. In that, I have a whole range of stakeholders. One, the people that are giving us the money, the Heritage Lottery Fund, I have an architect, I have the church council, and we have the contractors coming in to do the work. How you engage with your stakeholders really doesn't matter what discipline they're coming from. It's finding out what they are looking for within the project. Are they supportive of the project? Are they not supportive of the project? How can I engage with them? How can I gain from them? How can I change their mindset if they're slightly negative? And I do have a number of stakeholders within the organization that are reluctant about some of the work that we're doing, but it's a necessity to keep the building functioning. And it's just going in and talking to these people on a face-to-face basis. Emails is probably the worst thing you can do in a thing like that. Is go and talk to people. Get a feel for where they are, what their issues are, what their problems are, and how can you collectively resolve those. So hopefully that's answered that one.
We've got the next questions on stakeholder mapping. Do you find the impact influence aspects of stakeholder mapping can sometimes be a bit controversial? For instance, when the stakeholders themselves don't agree with your assessment. So how far would you suggest the information is shared among project participants? That's a good question.
Yeah, again, we come back to that word sanitized. When I was putting stakeholder maps together, like the one that you saw earlier, I was very careful who that was shared with. I was also very careful of what information was shared with relation to a particular stakeholder's stance within the project. Were they neutral? Were they a champion? Were they a blocker? How did they like information presented to them? Was it a bullet point? Was it a full-blown 6-page document every month? I was very careful of what information I gave. The stakeholder mapping exercise that I did and I do is primarily for my company sponsor, and it's for the project team, wherever that may stretch, and that's stretched across international boundaries, the project team. So you do have to be careful. You don't want to identify a stakeholder as, in your opinion, being a little bit reluctant about the project, and then he thinks he's very much in favor of the project. So well, if they think I'm reluctant, I'll become reluctant. So it's a very good question, but take it easy. And as I say, I am putting together a presentation that will deal with how you interact with the various stakeholders. This wasn't part of this presentation, but it's a very good question, and thank you for raising it.
The next question you've got some good experience in the defence industry that might be relevant here. So the question, who do you think is more responsible for the stakeholder engagement and management? Is it the project manager or project sponsor? There are cases from my experience, for example, most influential stakeholder only answers or responds to a senior level person. So is it appropriate to send a communication plan to the stakeholder, and you can plan a specific route of communication only? So again, this is about the roles, responsibilities around stakeholder engagement.
If you were to look at the theory of project management, they would tell you that the project sponsor is responsible for producing the communication plan and monitoring and transmitting that communication plan. However, the question I would ask back in return is how many who of you run a project have regular interaction with your project sponsor? Certainly many of the projects I've ran and the projects I've been involved in from the outside, the project sponsor is probably lacking in a lot of areas. A lot of project sponsors aren't trained to be a project sponsor. They're often nominated at a board meeting. Oh, by the way, you don't have anything on next month, you're the project sponsor. So it's an unwelcome baton that they're passed to you. I would say if I was taking on another big project, I would start putting together the stakeholder communication plan myself. I would try and discuss it with my project sponsor. If you then have senior members of your client or customer base that will only interact with senior members of your organization, then that's when you would then go and brief your project sponsor, and he would then go and brief the other person. Make sure that you do brief your project sponsor correctly and that he's not making promises that you, the project manager, can't fulfill. I've been on the receiving end of that. So it's it comes down to communication, talking to each other. Talk to your project sponsor, talk to your stakeholders. Are you happy talking to me, or do you want to talk to my boss or I mean, one way around it is to give the project manager a very high-sounding title. That might work.
Next question, can you please briefly state the difference between stakeholder management and stakeholder engagement? Do you want to take that one?
Yeah, this has always been a bone of contention with me. And when I hear people say, I manage my stakeholders, and I ask them to list who their stakeholders are, and often it's the chief financial officer or the CEO of the customer. Well, I defy anybody as a project manager to go and manage the CEO of another company. He's got a million things on his desk and just one of them happens to be the project you're dealing with. You can engage with them, you can manage their expectations, but you can't manage them. So that's why we prefer the term stakeholder engagement, because we engage with the stakeholders, we manage their expectations, and we communicate with them, and that communication is a two-way dialogue. I talk to them, they talk to me, and we listen to each other.
The next two questions are actually interesting because they're looking for potential case studies, and I'm not sure whether we do have case studies on these or whether.
No, I don't think we've got case studies as such, but how do you change the negative mindset of a stakeholder?
And there's that. So how do you change the negative mindset of a stakeholder? And the next question, how do you engage with stakeholders with high interest but minimal influence?
Yeah.
So I don't know if you've got examples of that.
How do you change the mindset of a stakeholder? Find out why they have concerns. And that's the first thing to do is what are their concerns? And that's best done sitting, either having a coffee or in an office, not in a public, and certainly not by emails. Get in front of them, talk to them. What are your concerns? What are your issues? How can I help? Now, some will start to move towards the more positive. Others will be entrenched in, no, I'm going to be, and you just have to handle that and know that they are constantly going to be a thorn in your flesh.
What I would say, actually, if anyone listening has got case studies or examples of how you dealt with these situations, please do let us know. It's quite clear that other people are looking for guidance around these sort of issues. Oh, here we go, here's another one. An example of dealing with an angry stakeholder. I don't know. Again, it's
the thing is to find out why they're angry. Are they angry because you haven't communicated with them, something's changed that you didn't tell them about? I'll give you an example. I talked about silos within your stakeholder area. The contract that I was involved in the Middle East, I had to go and brief one of the key stakeholders that I dealt with on a weekly basis. I went up to his office, and it was a 4.5-hour trip to get there by road, and I got to his office and he'd been called away and wouldn't be able to see me that day. So rather than just waste the drive there and back, I went and saw some of the other stakeholders in the main headquarter building. Thought nothing of it, had a chat with them, gave them a quick introduction of how the project was going, and drove home. The next day, I had to hold the phone about a mile from my ear as the primary stakeholder I'd gone to see let rip, because some of the others had made mileage out of the fact that I'd seen them and briefed them on the project, but I hadn't briefed him. So I had to go back up and hold his hand and say I was sorry and it would never happen again, and gave him a brief. And from that time on, I made sure that all of those 4 key stakeholders were always briefed on the same day. If one wasn't available, then I would phone him and say, I'm sorry, not available. I'll come back in a day or two's time and brief you, but I'll carry on briefing the others and not to just ignore them. So that was an example that I had to deal with.
I'll just do a pause here slightly. It's clear that people are looking for ideas and advice about how to deal with particular situations. There's one last slide I just put in as appendix of just publications that you might find useful. I've read the last 2. I have not read the first 2 on this list on the slide that I'm showing here, so I can't vouch for whether they're good, bad or indifferent. But I'll leave this page up so you can take a note of them. It's Communicating Projects by Anne Pilkington, Effective Stakeholder and Communication Management by Linda Bourne. The third one, the Global Risk Assessment and Strategic Planning book about the GRASS methodology has got some good information about stakeholder analysis. And the last one on the list is the Lens Collective, which was published by the APM People SIG, and I think that's going to be updated this year, which is a guide to helping you see the different perspectives of your stakeholders. So these are additional sources that you might want to go to for ideas about how to deal with these particular situations that we're getting questions about here. And so going back to the questions that are coming up, the next one we've got, how best to introduce a process for virtual stakeholder engagement. So this is interesting, Ian. You were saying, it's better, face-to-face is best, but what if you can't? What if you've got a virtual team or a very distributed team?
I would visit the UK from the Middle East probably every 4 to 6 weeks to engage with the key stakeholders here. I didn't go to Europe and I didn't go to the States, but what we would do there is have a video conference. And I would set up a video conference with the key people there and talk to them. Now, sometimes it would be a one-on-one video conference. Sometimes it would be myself and my project team with the stakeholder and some of his team or her team, and we would do it that way. I know it's not effective to travel around the world much as it might be desirable. Having said that, I hated the traveling. It's just a drain because it meant I was out of the office for 4 or 5 days. And although I met a lot of the stakeholders here in the UK and it was very useful, it still left me with a massive work when I got back. So yeah, try and get face-to-face if you can, certainly in the early days, and then work out how best to do it. Again, talk to your stakeholder and say, how best would you like me to communicate with you? Some are quite happy for a written bullet point once a month, once or 2 months, every whatever. Some want to see you. It depends on the customer, on the stakeholder, and then you work out what best is the solution for you there.
So the next question is interesting. Is there an instance when a stakeholder can be ignored? Ooh, I'd struggle to think of a situation.
At your peril. You will all come across the PESTLE acronym and what all that stands for. I would hesitate to ignore a stakeholder. Now, one of the things in the presentation I'm putting together at the moment is what I did, and I'm not saying that this is written in a book anywhere, it's what I did, is I broke my stakeholders down into Tier 1, Tier 2, and Tier 3 stakeholders. Tier 1 had a massive influence in the program. Tier 2 had some influence but kept going. Tier 3, they didn't have the ability to influence the program directly, but they were still a stakeholder, and I then changed how I communicated with each of those groups of those tiers as it needed. The thing is that stakeholders move between Tier 1 and Tier 2 on a fairly regular basis, so you've got to do that. But that's a presentation that's currently being worked on at the moment.
The next question we've got is about project sponsor. What strategies have you used to ensure the project sponsor is not perceived as distant and ensuring the sponsor has got enough but not too much, that's interesting, not too much information to remain engaged in the life of the project? So this is around engaging the sponsor. And
again, it's going to your sponsor and sitting down with your sponsor and saying, how much information do you want me to give you and how often? Because I appreciate you're a very busy person and you don't want me blocking up your inbox or coming to see you every 5 minutes with an update. What is it you actually need to be kept aware of what's going on, so that if you're asked by the board, you have a legitimate, honest answer. So again, it's communicating with your sponsor so that you don't overload them, but you don't leave them sitting out in the cold when they're asked by the CEO, how's the project going? And he goes, oh, actually, I don't know. I haven't heard from the project manager for a while. So talk with your project sponsor.
Next question is whether we've come across any off-the-shelf stakeholder management databases. I guess it's kind of like a CRM database, but a stakeholder management database. I haven't.
Off-the-shelf stakeholder management databases have been successfully used.
to be honest, I would probably look at the customer relationship management market if you're looking for something off the shelf. Databases, management tools for managing customers, account management. I can't name anything off the shelf, but if you want to get in touch, I'm sure we can find something if you want to get in touch directly.
The only word of caution I would put in here is every stakeholder in every project is different. So don't try and take something that works on a project last year that will work on a different project with a different stakeholder or a different sponsor this year. I'm sorry, but I keep harping on about communicating with them.
We've got something here from Stuart Digweed. You've said you've got some case studies that might be useful, and where can you find the template for the case study? Can you get in touch with us direct and we'll send that to you, because I don't think it's actually on the website. I don't think it's on the
website, but Stuart, if you get in touch with us, we will make sure that you get a suitable template and an example.
And I'm just putting up on the screen our contact details there. So if you want to get hold of Ian or myself, then come through LinkedIn, or indeed go onto the APM People SIG community page, and you'll find a link to either of us, and you can get in contact there. And again, if anyone can contribute a case study, then get in touch and we'll send you the template. How do you say no without saying no? How do you do it?
It was a lesson I learned very early on when doing project management in the Middle East. And a couple of the stakeholders, customer-based stakeholders, and I said, no, you can't have that. And then we come back to the question that was asked earlier on, is how do you handle an angry stakeholder? Believe me, I had an angry stakeholder on my hands when I said no. So some wise and wily old project manager said to me, you've got to learn to be able to say no without saying no. So he gave me a few hints, and one is that when they say, can I have that, I want this, do this, which can be quite demanding, particularly in the Middle East, is my response was, that's a very interesting concept. I've not actually thought about that. So I'd rather not give you an answer off the top of my head. Let me go away and think about it and get back to you. And then when you get back to them, you say, well, what's the basis of that, and what do you want to do that? And, oh, you know, we've got to think about the impact that's going to have on the project, and how you and I will be seen by our respective hierarchies of changing the project, delaying the project, spending more money. So what do you think we should do? It was quite interesting, because when I adopted that strategy, I'd done it half a dozen times to a very senior stakeholder, and his aide, who was sitting next to him, leant across and said, he actually means no, but he won't say it. And the general I was talking to said, interesting. And we got around it that way, just finding ways of, again, understanding what they want and what they want it, and what the impact will be, and then reminding them that they're also part of the impact.
I think related to that is also the need to, and it comes back to culture, about the need to understand if a stakeholder isn't saying no for cultural reasons. And Japan is one country where that is a potential issue, where you might be hearing a lot of yes, but actually that's not necessarily the reality. So again, it comes back to really understanding your stakeholders and getting inside their heads, and this may be where the Lens Collective publication could be useful for doing some good stakeholder analysis. We're getting close to time. I think we've got time for one more question, and if there are any questions left over, we will get responses to you. But the next question, I think the last question we've got time for, how do you prioritize among different stakeholders? I guess that's around communication.
Primarily, it's once you've gone through your stakeholder identification process, you then look at what influence that person would have on the project, either a positive or a negative impact. From that, you can then say, well, that's somebody I've got to keep a very close eye on, I've got to communicate on a very regular basis with. Somebody with less impact, you can sort of downgrade to my tier 2 if you've taken that. and sort of the general public that might be interested in what's going to happen to the particular project is sort of your level 3, tier 3. But tiers 1 and 2, they swap as the project and the program progresses. So that's why you've got to address it on a regular basis and keep them involved. As I say, that is a presentation that is being worked on at the moment, and perhaps sometime later this year, APM will put another webinar on where we can do it with that.
I'm going to sneak in one last question just before we close. How do you size, I think is how do you scale it's a stakeholder engagement between small and large projects? And one thing I would throw in is it's very dependent on the level of risk.
Yes.
For your project. I don't know if you've got some examples.
Yeah, if you've got a project that's worth £2 billion, which is the one I was involved in the Middle East, then you have a lot of stakeholders that are in there. The project that I'm involved in with the church has got a much smaller level of stakeholders, and I keep that fairly small. I address the general public of what's going on through the local papers and the local radio channels. So again, it's looking at the size of your project, the amount of risk there is on the project, the value of the project, and then size it that way.
Okay, thanks Ian. We are up to time. Thank you everyone for joining us today. If you've got any other questions that we've not addressed yet, please do contact us directly. Got contact details on the screen. We hope this has been useful. Don't forget the slides and recording will be posted on the APM website on the People SIG community page. And that's it for us. Thank you. Have a good afternoon and goodbye.
Goodbye. Thank you very much.